What's up, Planeswalkers? Theoric 6, back playing some Magic the Gathering Arena Beta. Today I decided to do an updated deck tech. The reason for this is I went back and looked at the original deck tech I did for this White Black Zombies deck, and I noticed that a sufficient number of changes have been made. The deck is played slightly differently, and so I decided it would be good to refresh and update the video, as well as I think that I'm going to be adding enough new information here to warrant doing a second updated deck tech. So let's just get right into it. 2-time reflex. This has been in the budget version. It's in this version still, because it is still just great removal. The fact that it costs 1 mana is absolutely great. The fact that it exiles instead of destroys means that you can use it against the gods, mostly being Hazaret and Scarab God. Additionally, it deals with annoying eternalized creatures like Champion of Wits and that Earthshaker Kenra, I think is what it's called. I was going to search for it, but I'm pretty sure it's Earthshaker Kenra. And it being 1 mana means you're able to pretty easily leave up 1 for it. 4 Dread Wanderers. This is now the only 1-drop in the deck. The reason being, Festering Mummy, sadly, isn't impactful enough for the deck as it is now, as I'm deciding to play it. I've decided to play the deck in very much a mid-range way, because that is the type of gameplay I'm used to playing. That's the type of gameplay I think I'm best at. So instead of having a more aggressive low curve of 8 1-drops, I instead have just the 4. And the reason Dread Wanderer is fantastic for that is, 1, it comes back, and 2, it comes back. The fact that you're able to use Plague Belcher to unload counters on it is great. The fact that you can attack with functional impunity without worrying about your opponent blocking in some certain way is also great. And the fact that late game, if you have no cards in hand and you have 6 mana, 2 Dread Wanderers, you did get to pay 6 for 2 creatures. With our 5 non-creature anthems, that means that theoretically you're still getting at least like 3/2s, 2 3/2s in value, which is absolutely fantastic. Something that I'm trying out recently is a split of 2/2 between Binding Mummy and Wretched Camel. This lowers our white commitment severely, meaning that 1, we don't need to play as many planes, which I'm still not sure if that's a blessing or a curse, but 2, it also means that our matchups against control are slightly better. Binding Mummy isn't actually fantastic against control. Where Binding Mummy shines is in a meta full of white-black vampires, full of the mono-white knights deck, full of blue-green merfolk, things like that. The other creature-based decks that like to go wide, but whose creatures don't necessarily get incredibly large. And as of right now, I'm going up against primarily white-blue control and mono-red or red-black aggro. And Binding Mummy, sadly, is just not as great there. If you're coming up against several of these blue-green merfolk, any of the other creature decks I mentioned, I would suggest dropping down the Wretched Camels and going back up to 4 Binding Mummies. This does go slightly against my my idea of keeping as many 4s as possible, but I think it's warranted because this is a best of 1 format and we don't have sideboards. If it were a perfect world, I think the main deck would look a certain way and the sideboard would look a certain way. I think you may also notice that I do have sideboard cards. That will be at the end of the video. Some extra discussion there. I'm running 2 2-mana removals, 1 Cast Out and 1 Grinded Dust. The reason I'm running 1 of each is, for 1, Grinded Dust is a rare and I don't feel like crafting it yet. And 2, I wanted to see which one I was using more frequently. Cast Down is much better in the other mid-range style decks, going against the 3-mana 5/4 in green, going against like Glory Bringers and things like that, because they aren't legendary and being destroyed is fine. Grinded Dust is much better against the lower end things, in that you're able to hit several X1s early in the game, but also Grinded Dust is a little bit better late game against the god-based control decks, things with Scarab God, because you're able to just grind to dust them in possibly the same turn. So what I think this means is that Cast Out is generally better if you're going up against other aggro mid-range mid-range adjacent decks. Whereas Grinded Dust, I think, is when you are finding there are very few actual mid-range decks that you're coming up against. Grinded Dust, I think, is much better against the aggro decks and much better against the control decks than Cast Down, but not so much against the mid-range decks. And I'm not entirely sure. I haven't been able to play as many games as I'd hope, mostly just because I keep coming up against mono red and they kill me a lot, and then I get flustered and I have to take a pause, because I think that's a very healthy thing to do when you're not sure about how you're doing in a game. So these numbers should probably be a 2x into 0x. If you are coming up against these certain types of decks, you'll definitely want to maintain that better ratio of having a greater consistency. The second of the 2-drops that I'm playing is Wretched Camel. After putting this in my budget version of the deck, I was incredibly surprised by how strong this card is. It is almost always online. It does just die sometimes, but the fact that you get value when it does die means that you don't care as much. There have been several situations where I'll go turn 1 Dreadwonder, turn 2 Wretched Camel, maybe turn 3 Plague Belcher, or something like that, where my opponent is very easily going to be playing Golden Demise. And Golden Demise then becomes less than a 3-for-1. Let's say I have 3 creatures, one of which being Wretched Camel, one of which being Dreadwonder. I can get Dreadwonder back. Wretched Camel causes them to discard a card. Let's say that then Wretched Camel, take it out of the situation. So we're looking at a 2-for-1, kills Dreadwonder and something else. But Dreadwonder I can get back. So that's about half a card. So it's really a 2 for 1.5, which is not what they're looking for. These control decks definitely want to make sure you run out of gas, and Wretched Camel just pressures their hand so much. Even against the aggressive decks, it's a blocker that gets rid of something in their hand. I was going up against mono red aggro earlier today, actually, and I was able to block with Wretched Camel, killing, I think, a Kenra Eternal, and Shaker Kenra, my bad. And they had 2 cards in hand. I'm assuming the second one was Hazoret, and they had to discard a Lightning Strike. The fact that they got rid of some of their reach in order to keep Hazoret, they ended up dying. Obviously, I didn't see the Hazoret. I assume it was Hazoret. Just shows the power of Wretched Camel, because in any matchup, you're able to get something out of their hand. Apologies for the sirens. Yeah. For Wayward Servant, still why I'm running white-black. I have a mono-black deck, which you guys can let me know if you want to see a deck take of that version. The mono-black deck is fine. It is also more aggro-oriented because you don't have these Time Reflects, the Cast-Outs, and the Wayward Servants, which I use to grind out my opponents with a little bit of reach. But I just love this card so much because it drains. I was going up against blue-black control, who had been removing my creatures consistently. I must have had 7 or so creatures in the graveyard at this point. And with Wayward Servant, and I think I ended up resolving 2 Vanquisher's Banner, I was able to accrue so much value that I didn't even have to attack. Oh no, it was an Esper control deck, because I refused to attack because I thought they would settle the wreckage me. And what I did was I had Wayward Servant, and I kept casting zombies, and I was getting so much value off of my Vanquisher's Banner that I ended up just draining them to death. And that is the reason to run Wayward Servant, is the fact that you have this reach against control, and you have this life gain against aggro. Sadly, it being a 2/2 means that it dies to a lot of things. So often in the red-based aggro decks, they'll kill this with a magma spray. But they have the removal. They're going to play it. There's not a ton you can do about that. Moving on to my 3-drop slot for Lord of the Accursed. It's a Lord. The menace very rarely matters, but being able to use that menace against other mid-range or even control decks is absolutely fantastic. You have 4 zombies, which includes this, and they have 4 creatures. Excuse me. You're able to tap down Lord to make it so you're going to get through with at least 1 creature. And the fact that you have a buff on them means that you're probably going to be trading very favorably. Not much to say about this card. It's a great Lord. For Plague Belcher, still a staple. Like Wayward Servant, this card is there to grind your opponent out. You can play it down, use it on Dreadwander, use it on Wretched Camel, and they'll immediately lose 1 life because you killed a zombie. Additionally, against using it on Dreadwander means that you're getting extra value because Dreadwander can come back. And using it in Wretched Camel, if you're in a situation where you want Wretched Camel to die, but your opponent isn't really playing ball, as it were, you can very easily use it on the Wretched Camel, force them to discard. They have no choice. There have actually been situations in which you attack with Wretched Camel. They have a creature that can block, but they just don't take the block because they want to keep everything in their hand. And then main phase 2, play out a Plague Belcher, and now they have to make a tough decision that, if they make it wrong, will probably lose them the game. The fact that it has Menace, also fantastic. You can just easily have these things be 6/5, 7/6s, and your opponent is just not going to be able to block properly because of how many anthems we have in this deck that do other things as well. I have had several situations against the green-red monsters deck where my opponent would play Carnage Tyrant, and my Plague Belcher could contest them, right? My 3-drop can contest their mythic 6-drop. So Plague Belcher, I think, is another cornerstone of the deck that I would suggest not ever cutting. 2 cast outs. It's possible that you want to run more, mainly because the cycling and the flash are fantastic. I was going against that same red-green monsters deck, and they would keep playing a dinosaur after a dinosaur after a dinosaur, and I had I had cast down into cast out into cast out. On the second cast out, I had enough mana to also play a Wretched Camel. I ended up the following turn playing a Liliana's Mastery and attacking with a dope 3/2 Camel, and at that point I was easily able to grind them out of the game. But cast out, it's a fantastic card. It hits literally everything you need it to hit, except lands, which I'll get to when I talk about the cards that are currently in the sideboard. But yeah, I would run between 2 and 3 if you are running the white version. 4 I think is too many. You'll probably end up cycling more often than not, and you don't want to be cycling it that frequently. I decided to grab Josu Vess. We had, other than cast out, we had no 4-drops, and the bodies that we have, unless we have Lords or Anthems, are not substantial. Having Josu Vess means that we have, 1, another Menace attacker, so this paired with Plague Belcher means your opponent is going to be losing, they're going to be hemorrhaging life. And we have a decent stat block, right? Being a 4/5, this thing is able to block everything except for the 4-drop or high, everything except for the bombs in mono red. And being able to go with 1 Anthem, this being a 5/6, is able to block essentially everything right now. So the card's great. You never play the kicker, like ever. That's just not a thing you do. I don't think I've ever been at 10 mana. Is that true? I don't think I've been at 10 mana, but if you are, you win on the spot. There's almost no way your opponent will be able to deal with it. But that's not how we evaluate this card. This is a mono black Siege Rhino essentially, and I am a man who loves his Siege Rhino. It's been pretty good for me. Sadly, I do think you should only run it at 2, and I haven't been seeing it as often as I would like to give a complete recommendation. But I do think the card is worth the craft if you have the rest of the rares that are more integral. 3 Liliana's Death Majesty. It's a Planeswalker. Your opponent focuses Planeswalkers down. So there have actually been times against the mono red matchup where I'll drop a Liliana plus her, and they have to make not only bad attacks, because I do have a 2/2 or with an Anthem a 3/3 to block with, but also they're essentially losing 6 damage to my face. Minimum, right? If they're just attacking with just enough to kill Liliana. So Liliana is fantastic in saving life, but she's also great in, obviously, the control matchup, where you put her down, and you can either, 1, plus until you're able to destroy their non-zombie crap, or 2, get back very important pieces. Almost always Lord of the Accursed, Wayward Servant, in order to keep this value train going. I found that with Liliana Death's Majesty, after putting in the Wretched Camel, I very frequently use the -3. Before I put the Wretched Camel in, I often just +1 to try and get her to a point where she's able to -7. But Wretched Camel just makes it so I'm getting back a card for functionally free, and you're going to lose a card. And that just crushes control games. Running 3, I think, is kind of necessary because the card will get countered and destroyed frequently, and having Liliana redundancy is not a bad thing. Next up, we have Liliana's Mastery. Card is insane. It was insane when I first put it in. It's still insane now. Being able to just drop... I hate you, Sirens. Being able to just drop a 5-drop and have 6 power worth of guys is great. It buffs all of our other creatures to make them even stronger. And it's absolutely worth the slots. 2 Vanquisher banner. This is, if I were to cut a card to slot something else in, I think it'd be Vanquisher banner, but it would be a very sad cut. The reason is the Anthem does not matter nearly as much as that last line of text. Whenever you cast a creature spell, chosen type, draw a card. I've won so many games against control because I've had one of these things out, and I'm able to just constantly refill my hand, and my opponent is just not able to keep up to that value, right? My opponent, who's been drawing cards in the blue-black game I was talking about earlier, my opponent was at 30 cards in the deck, and I was like, how many cards have I drawn? How much more value had they had this game than me? I had also 30 cards. Vanquisher's Banner alone is like the only card drawn in this deck. I had as many cards drawn as my opponent, who was playing blue-black did. And like that was the moment I realized like I should probably keep Vanquisher's Banner in for a little bit longer. It also, you know, it is just an Anthem, so it helps you win the creature matchups as well. My land situation has changed slightly. Because I ended up getting rid of 4 of my 1-drops, I decided to go back into 2 Forsaken Sanctuaries. I will end up running 4 Isolated Chapels as soon as I'm able to get the rare wild card to open them from Dominaria packs. But for now, having 4 total Ender tapped lands is fine. Yeah, it hasn't been a problem yet that I can remember. But in general, I'm not a big fan of lands that can only enter tapped. Isolated Chapel from time to time will enter tapped because we do sometimes lead off with like an Ifnir Deadlands or a Shefet Dunes. But in general, Isolated Chapel is what you're going to want to have. If you're running the more mid-rangey late-game deck, Forsaken Sanctuary is fine to use. One of each, Desert of the True, Desert of the Glorified. It cycles. It's a desert. You can use it for Wretched Camel. You can use it for Ifnir or Shefet. Great card. 5 plains, 9 swamps. Now, technically, the deck wants 11 swamps and 3 plains or something like that, something to that effect. And no. The reason no is that we don't have double black until Josu. So we're fine waiting a little bit longer on double black, but our white cards are low curve. So we want white early enough that I'm pretty sure we should be running at least 5 plains. 1 Shefet Dunes. The deck is not as aggressive as other decks may be. So Shefet Dunes I only want a 1 of. I almost never use this card. Yeah, I don't think I really ever use this card for the activated ability. 2 Ifnir Deadlands, I use this card all the time. This card kills everything. And with Grinded Dust, if you end up needing to use Grind early game to destroy some... Let's say you use Grind early game to kill 2 X1s from your mono red opponent. Late game, they have Hazoret out. You can Ifnir Deadlands, shrink the Hazoret so you don't take as much damage. And then the following turn, because I assume you don't have, 9 mana to spend, you're able to dust the Hazoret, which is absolutely fantastic. 9 swamps, or swamps, Isolated Chapels, you want them over for Forsaken Sanctuaries, and 2 Dunes of the Dead, you don't want very many colorless sources. You could maybe run more Dunes of the Dead. I do run more Dunes of the Dead in the mono black version, but for right now, this is all I'm comfortable with. So, what is this sideboard nonsense? I decided I'm going to talk a little bit about some optional choices, because not everyone has all the cards, and I think that other playstyles might benefit different cards. So Time Reflect in here because you might want to run more Time Reflects. Time Reflects is just that good. However, Time Reflects require more a heavier density of creatures. If you do end up running more Time to Reflect, my suggestion is to start cutting away at the anthems and put in more creatures. I'm only running 2 Time to Reflects. Running 3 means you get them more frequently. I would suggest doing this if you are running up against a ton of indestructible creatures. Festering Mummy, as I said in the past, Festering Mummy is fantastic for tricks. If you're going up against almost entirely mono red, that I suggest you play Festering Mummies. But as it is right now, I'm running up against mono red and the blue-based control decks, and against blue-based control, it is essentially a non-card. But yeah, if you're running up against these heavy aggro decks, my suggestion is put in some Festering Mummies. Fungal Infection is a card that I tested a little, and it is great against mono red, and that is it. If you're finding yourself going up against mono red, Time Reflex, not great against mono red, I should point out. They're okay because they can kill Hazoret, but otherwise, in general, they're not great against mono red. They're too slow because your creatures constantly die. So my suggestion is, if you're facing nothing but mono red's really frustrating you, go with Fungal Infections and Festering Mummies. Festering Mummies can replace something like the Camel, I suppose. Binding Mummy is fine to remove for something like Fungal Infection or Festering Mummy. However, Binding Mummy is great to add more copies of. Right now it's only 2. If you're facing almost nothing but those kind of mid-level creature decks, the Merfolks and the Vampires. And you would want to obviously replace this for Wretched Camel. Cast Down is a card that I'm currently trying, so that's why it's still just a 1-of. If, as I said in the main deck discussion, you are looking to just grind your opponent out, kill their stuff, and you're not finding you're coming up against a lot of legendaries, this is a great card to use. This is great against the 3-mana 5/4. I don't know its name. I know what it looks like, and I know its cost. If you're looking to be more aggressive, Counter Eternal still is great. It was in the cheap version. It's in the mono black version. It's still, a decent body. Moment of Craving is if you're looking to go even more controlling. If you end up putting in Moment of Craving, your creature count is probably going to be lower. I would suggest taking out Time Reflex for it. Moment of Craving is great against most of the creature decks because you're able to kill the lords, and it's also great against the aggro decks because, one, you're able to kill their stupid 2/2s with First Strike or Haste or Menace, while still gaining some life. So Moment of Craving is a great card. It just currently doesn't fit, I think, in my deck because against the control decks, it's not as good. Theoretically, you can save up Moment of Craving and use it to minus a Hazoret or something like that. But against Scarab God, it doesn't actually matter because Scarab God still dies and then comes back again. So if you're going up against a lot of aggro or a lot of creature decks, I would say bring in some Moment of Craving. If you're cutting on the creatures, take out Time to Reflect for it. Wretched Camel, reverse for Binding Mummy. If you're finding yourself going up against Blue-White Approach, Blue-Black Control, Esper, Search for Azcanta. That's a deck I come across sometimes. Bring in the Wretched Camels, take out the Binding Mummies. Radiant Destiny is, if you want to just go nothing but dudes and anthems, you can take out the Lilianas, put in some Radiant Destinies, and your guys are going to get swole. I will say, I caution against using Radiant Destiny any more than a 2-of, because Radiant Destiny does not add to your board if you don't have a board. All of the others, other than Vanquisher's Banner, add to your board immediately, and Vanquisher's Banner helps after you've already got it down. Radiant Destiny does not do that. So I do caution against using too much, but if you don't have Lilianas and you do have Radiant Destinies, this is a fine replacement because it will make your guys large. Amulet Eternal is for those aggressive decks where you just want to murder your opponent. My suggestion is to only use it in mono black. I currently don't use it in my mono black build, but that's only because it's rare, and I currently am crafting rares for my main deck. But if you have Amulet Eternals, it is a good card. It is absolutely playable. My suggestion is to use it in a more mono red or mono blue, mono black. I know the colors of Magic, I swear. A mono black aggressive version. Unraveling Mummy is great if you want to have more white. It's not as strong a card as I hoped, but it is strong enough that it is worth running. Especially if you are wanting to have more justification for running white. That's essentially all I have for that. Cast Out, I already talked about it a little. Torment of Scarabs is a fun card. That's why I have it on here. Torment of Scarabs is fine if you don't have Josu, or if you don't have Liliana. because it does kind of just grind your opponent out. Something you can do is you can run Torment of Scarabs and the other Torment, which is 2 cost. Where are you at? Where? Trespasser's Curse. So you run Trespasser's Curse, Wayward Servant, Torment of Scarabs, and Plague Belcher, and you kind of just drain your opponent to death. It isn't like amazing. You also run like Wretched Camel and stuff, but essentially you're just sucking the life force out of your opponent, and that's like an interesting build that I did toy around with conceptually. I don't have necessarily 4 of the pieces, but it's a fun deck to play. I don't know whether or not it's good, but it's worth putting in here. Field of Ruin, if you are coming up against a lot of decks that are using annoying lands, run Field of Ruins. I'm not currently, and I don't want to lower my, or increase my colorless land count, so I decided not to include it. My suggestion is get rid of either Shefet Dunes or Grasping Dunes. Dunes of the Dead. Grasping of the Dead here. Because you really don't want to mess with your mana base too much. Grasping Dunes, same thing, those same cards you want to get rid of. Grasping Dunes is a cheaper way to put a -1/-1 counter on a god, for example. But it doesn't do as much. It doesn't add black. And it has to sacrifice itself, which means you're not able to use it as many times as Ifnir Deadlands. It is a desert itself, which means you do get the trigger off of Wretched Camel. You can theoretically sacrifice it to Ifnir Deadlands if you want to get that extra counter. But it's a cheaper Deadlands effect. But being colorless, I did stay away from it. I do think it's worth running if you would like. So that is the main deck updated. I do have a mono black version here. Let me know if you guys would like to see the mono black version. Let me know if you guys enjoyed the fact that I updated the deck tech. I wasn't sure because it was only like 2 weeks ago, but I'm incredibly surprised at how fast the deck has changed in those 2 weeks. And it might not seem like much has changed, but I think, like, from my perspective, a ton has changed. I've added so many cards and I've taken out so many cards. Let me know if you guys like the video. Let me know if you guys want to see any specific type of thing. And yeah, give it a thumbs up if you want. I don't necessarily care. I really appreciate the comments. I've been getting a couple new subscribers here and there, which is absolutely fantastic. I've been getting comments from people, and it's great to see the comments, right? It really makes my day. It's absolutely fantastic. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll be one.